Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Skylar Tibbits. I'm faculty at MIT, Department of Architecture, and part of the Morningside Academy for Design, or MAD. We're super excited to be here. And MAD was started 2 years ago to try to amplify and connect design across campus at MIT and globally, hence why we're excited to be here and connect with the design community. And most people probably know MIT for science, engineering, robotics, computing, maybe more recently AI. But there's also a long history of design at MIT, from the likes of Muriel Cooper to John Maeda or George Nakashima, I.M. Pei, Buckminster Fuller. There's a very long history. And MAD is really looking to try to propel that design history into the future and look at new avenues. So with Design Miami, we're here to explore the intersection of AI and design. But we really see this as a longer-term vision and a longer-term collaboration to imagine and analyze the connection between emerging technologies and design. So we want to thank Glenn and Grella and the entire Design Miami team for inviting us. We're honored to be here. Today's session will focus on the emergence of AI and the intersection with design. And all of us have been inundated by AI over the past several years, whether that's ChatGPT or image generators or video. It seems like every day there's something new, and it feels like this is the start of a new era, whether that's the start of the internet or the start of the personal computing revolution or the start of digital fabrication, or you name it. It seems like we're right at that tipping point. And so the question really is, how will AI change the field of design? Going beyond images and videos, how does it impact our physical environment? What are the risks? What are the opportunities? What is happening now? So these are some of the things that we want to talk about today. And we have an incredible panel today with us to look at this from different perspectives, different areas of design. So first we have Marcelo Coelho, faculty at MIT, Department of Architecture, Director of Design Intelligence Lab. Behnaz Farahi, Assistant Professor, Director of the Critical Matter Group at MIT's Media Lab. Paola Antonelli, Senior Curator, Architecture and Design, Director, Research and Development at MoMA. And Tony Fadell, iPod inventor, iPhone co-inventor, Nest founder, Build Collective, principal and New York Times bestselling author. So we have pretty stacked lineup, different perspectives all around design. And what we're going to do is we'll go one by one. We'll have a sort of 5-minute intro talking about their background, their work, their perspective on AI and design, and then we'll have a discussion and hopefully leave some time for Q&A. So we'll kick it off with Marcelo. Oh, you don't need that. You do that.
You're keeping track of time, right? Make sure we don't talk for too long. All right, good. Hi, so super excited to be here. My work is focused on embodying computation and creating ways to physically interact with computers. This goes across a range of different things, from a very small scale. So in this example here of a castle that was drawn into a grain of sand on the left, all the way to scale a stadium. So that's the stuff that you see on the right. So let me show you some examples. So 640 by 480 is a light installation that I've created to let you really experience what it's like to physically interact with computing, be immersed in it. So it works a little bit like this. I don't know if you can lower the audio a little bit. So it's all these little sort of physical pixels. If you touch one of them, they light up and change color. They sort of cycle through a color palette. If you hold one down and you touch a second one, you can transfer colors from one to the other. And you do this by literally transmitting data through your body. So your body becomes a kind of wire and part of a circuit. I like to think of it as kind of a physical copy and paste. So bringing some of the things you do in computer land into the physical world. You can also control lots of them at the same time. So I'm using an infrared remote control here to paint them with light. And it can create different kinds of animations, different kinds of behaviors. And when you get a lot of them together, you can now create this sort of larger patterns. You can literally just sort of paint with your hand. So when you get a lot of these together, you get this sort of really exciting behavior. So you really get to experience what it's like to paint with light just by sort of moving the remote control like a brush. And you get this kind of emergent behaviors as well. So you can see in this next slide here. So we discovered that if you cover the light from the remote, you get sort of silhouettes from your body. So I got to work on the Paralympics opening and closing ceremonies in 2016 as well. And I was very focused on trying to make sure that we really portray the kind of role of technology in augmenting the human body during the ceremonies. So this is Amy Purdy. She's a Paralympian. She's actually wearing a 3D printed dress. And in this segment, she dances samba with a Kuka robot, a sort of giant industrial robot. The robot's not very good at dancing samba, by the way. Don't recommend you do that. But I focus a lot on this segment called Beyond Vision. It's all about vision. And where I invented a kind of a new radio protocol that allows both the dancers who are on stage and the sort of light sticks that they're carrying to sort of use the same kind of communication. So I'll play this so you can see how this works. So there's signals that are being listened by the dancers that tell them where to go. And when the lights hear the same signals, they know what animations to play. And then combined, you create the show. So it's probably no news to anybody here, that design and computing in many ways have become generative. But what I like to tell my students is that, an image of a camera is not a camera. And design is, physical. It exists in the physical world and has all kinds of constraints that are not the same that we get with image generating models or large language models, for example. And I think what's happening now is that AI is becoming physical. So we're going to be able to talk to objects, using natural language. They'll be able to talk back. We'll be able to listen into what objects are saying. Interfaces and behaviors are going to become generative as well. Things are going to be predictive. So objects are going to be able to generate themselves before you even know you need them. And they'll be agentic as well. They're going to start working together, creating their own kinds of behaviors and being autonomous. So it's an entirely new kind of design space that you yet have to experience that's about to emerge. And I want to give you a few examples of some of the things you've been doing. So this is Being Material. It's actually a collaboration with Skylar, where we got this book that's called Being Material. It's a very sort of, in many ways, a traditional book. And we took photos, 150 photos of every single spread in the book to train an image classifier so that you can then use a phone to recognize each page and then display additional content to the contents in the book. So here's an example. So if you point your phone to anywhere in the book, you can bring up different videos and animations. And this is no QR code, no tags. It's just a regular book. This is an article written by Tal Danino on the sort of aesthetics of bacteria growth, and you can pull up these different videos of bacteria growing in petri dishes. And it's also generative, so there's a special bookmark, and if you move that around the cover, you can create these different patterns and really synthesize the book in a new way. And this is an area that I'm very excited about, I call large language objects, which is looking at ways to create physical interfaces for large language models. So we can situate and embody these AI models into the physical world. So there's an example of a lamp called the Color of Language that uses voice to control it. So there's no buttons, no switches, and if you want a color, you have to say something very poetic to it. So if you say, give me the color of the sunset in Miami, and then it gives you a color. And it looks at how you can encode color into large language models, just through language, no image. This is another example from some of my students called Narratron. It's a kind of a small little projector for storytelling for kids. And what it does, if you put your hand in front of it, it detects if you do any sort of shadow puppets. And then it creates stories, and you can navigate through the stories as you turn this little yellow crank. And this one is a quite special one. This is called Beat the Beat. It's a boombox with a speaker and a camera. And it inverts the relationship between music and dancing. So typically you hear music and you dance to it. This does the opposite. You dance, and based on how you dance, it generates music. It totally flips it. And perhaps this is for our discussion later. As a designer and as an educator, I'm very interested in this question, what does design look like in the age of artificial intelligence? So if you look at previous technological revolutions, they all led to the emergence of different forms of design, and I'm very curious to find out what design will look like with AI now. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Behnaz Farahi. I'm assistant professor at MIT Media Lab, where I lead critical matter research group. I also collaborate with Morningside Academy for Design to amplify design voices across the campus. So in critical matter research group, we're very interested to see how we can use technology in a meaningful way. We work across the scales from fashion to architecture to interactive design of public art installations. We are a new group, and the work that you're seeing is a result of creative practice that I've done in the last 12 years, which provides a foundation for the type of work that we're going to do in the group. So when we're talking about generative AI and design, a lot of times this landscape is populated with image that generated using various type of generative AI tools that they look absolutely stunning and polished, which is incredible to actually see. So a lot of time, the role of designers is to produce these 2D images. And what is incredible about it is that now, as designers, you don't have to be trained as designers or architects, but you actually have access to these tools. You can produce stunning works, even if you're not designers, which provides a new type of access. And from inclusivity perspective, you can say it's a win, but it also raised questions about what is the role of design and what is the role of designers in this new age. Perhaps we could talk about the role of designers as someone who is developing frameworks or controlling the frameworks from 2D to 3D in the near futures. But I also, in my work, I would like to talk about AI in ways that AI has been used for interaction design. So we can use AI for from various ways that we can understand patterns of human physiological responses. We can use AI and machine learning from biometric sensors to facial and gaze tracking technologies to unfold some of the very invisible meanings that are hidden in our social interactions. So, for instance, this is a 3D printed cape that is equipped with gaze tracking, facial tracking camera, and it responds to onlooker's gaze. So I would argue that this is not only a piece of technological innovation, but it actually addresses larger social gender issues such as the male gaze on the female body. So if you're the wearer, you know which part of your body is being looked at because the object is moving on your body. And if you're on the onlooker, you also realize that your action has been noticed. So it potentially changes the social interactions. Or in these robotic masks that inspired by Iranian historical mask, the goal is to really see how we can use machine learning, AI-generated text messages that is generated through machine learning algorithm as a way of empowering these women to send and receive secret messages among themselves. So the question is really how we can use AI and large language models and various generative AI tools as a way of empowering rather than replacing human intelligence. And this is something that I'm extremely excited about. And lastly, I would like to finish by really thinking about how we could use AI in a critical way. Among a lot of designers, there is a lot of interest into using AI as a generative AI tools and looking at AI as a tool. Some thinkers such as Blaise Agura across from Google Artificial Intelligence, for instance, they're interested to look at AI as ways that it can mirror human intelligence or human creativity, which is really fascinating as well. In Critical Matter Research Group, I'm really interested to see how we can use AI to empower the voices that haven't been heard or have been underrepresented in the history. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Behnaz. So my name is Paola Antonelli, and I work at the Museum of Modern Art, where I am a senior curator for architecture and design, and also director of R&D, but it's an R&D that is not really based on technology, but rather on seeing how museums can help society and become the R&D of society. So as a curator and as a museum person, I've been dealing with AI for quite a while, both in very pragmatic terms. How can AI be integrated in the workings of a museum? Even, for instance, to scan past catalogs and make them perfectly searchable. I mean, there are so many different applications you can imagine. But as a curator of architecture and design, I've been looking at AI pretty much in a similar way to the way with which I have been considering past technologies. A kind of 360-degree way. What kind of tools they can be, the new set of tools can be for design, and also the impact that these tools can have on design in all of its aspects, including the ethical ones that deal with sustainability, with the environment, and also with human rights. Next week is going to be the anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, let's not forget, and design is deeply involved with it too. So every time I consider a new technology, and the impact it has on design, I also think not only of the aesthetics and function, but also of human rights, and also of the rights of the more than human. We're talking of beyond human today, and we are talking beyond human because we're talking about AI, but there's also other species and other planets. And so today I would like, as a curator, to show you two really good examples of use of AI. Very basic AI, not generative. Some of the examples, like this one, pretty old. This is by Daisy Ginsberg, Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg. She is a designer and artist based in London that comes from the Royal College of Art. And she used AI to create this pollinator garden. So it's a garden that actually exists in the UK, that is planted not for the benefit of humans, but for the benefit of pollinating insects. So you see it here as it is right now. Gorgeous garden, very British. So that's neat. But this is how it came to be. So you see here some of the schemes that the AI concocted years ago, deciding what kind of planting to do and in which sequence, so that pollinators, which means bees and many other insects, could extract the most benefit from it. That means thinking of like the sequence of planting, when the different flowers are blooming, and how they're going to actually behave. And it's really quite remarkable to see that AI can help us with this very complex organic kind of function. You can imagine this happening also in agriculture. So much discussion is happening right now to try and move back from the monoculture that so many fields are planted with right now to old sequences, old wisdom. Sometimes much of what the AI is fed with and the kind of like database refer to very ancient wisdom by indigenous people in some cases. So that can be fed into AI to kind of replenish also certain ways of being and certain ways of cultivating the earth. So these are positive examples of use of AI that we can think of. Another very beautiful use is by a company called Domestic Data Streamers, based in Barcelona. It's a company that deals with data, not only visualization, but also embodiment. Data visualization, I'm sure you're all familiar with, is the way to render complex databases in ways that are understandable by wide audiences. In their case, they have a background not only in design, but also in theater, so they tend to actually perform data with very interesting and sometimes hilarious outcomes, like performances in the streets of Barcelona. This is a beautiful use of AI. It's called synthetic memories. It's about using AI to give images and even videos of memories that have never been captured before. So it's very useful for old people, for instance, that might have gone through moments of war, and also for migrating populations. And in Barcelona, they have established an office for citizens for synthetic memories. And you see people are interviewed in detail, and then their oral history and their images are fed, or their memories are fed into a computer that gives back images that were never captured before. So you can see here, I remember my grandfather's hug when he came home from work, so very benign and very intimate portrait that enable people to transmit a legacy to the future. And you can imagine how important this is for instance, people have been displaced violently either by natural or human-made causes, right? Or I remember the water jugs on a donkey, or even more poignantly, this is a beautiful video, it's the story of a woman, Maria Carmen, in Barcelona, whose father, this is a lady who's now in her 90s, her father had been imprisoned by Franco, the dictator, in a prison in Barcelona, and so her mother was renting a balcony in the home of a woman whose balcony gave onto the yard of the prison, so once a week they could go and see their father from that balcony. So this is a memory that was never captured and that is now rendered by AI. Now, of course, I'm showing you some beautiful examples of how AI can be employed. Luckily, it's not only that, and this panel will tell you there are so many different ways to deal, use, and be impacted by AI. And actually, Tony is going to bring many of them up. And there are also designers that are very much interested in monitoring AI and in letting people know how AI can be tamed, perhaps. So design can really help not only show good uses of AIs, but also make people understand what one should be aware of and how to move about it. So, thank you.
Okay, tough acts to follow here. Let's see. Where did I click? There I am. Okay, that's me, if you didn't know. I'm going to go much more on the practical side of things. These are beautiful examples and dreaming things. I'm very much grounded in atoms and bits and have been doing this stuff for 35 years. So here's a bunch of different things that I've created or helped to create over time. And if you look at the little thing with the blue screen on there, that was one of the very first products that ever had AI embedded in it. We couldn't call it AI. That came out in 2011. We called it, it was learning. It's called the learning thermostat. But we had machine learning and we had AI inside of it. But if we called it that back then, it would scare everyone. AI on my wall. What is this controlling? Like, no. Now, if it doesn't have AI, it's not going to be successful. But I've been at this AI thing now for over 15 years. And like I said, it's been around. You just didn't know it's been around until you just saw what ChatGPT did. But it has been through, and I'm going to show you a bunch of practical examples where we're already using it today and have been using it for a decade. So I've been around building a lot of teams and been part of a lot of teams, amazing teams in the past. And then there's my book, which also was inspired by my mentors all these years, all about building, whether it's a team, a product, yourself. But let's talk about uses of AI. So these are very, very practical uses of AI. And the way I think about AI is in two different domains. AI, LLMs today, it's hallucination. Okay, and there's hallucination for good, which we saw with a lot of these things, and there's hallucination for bad. And AI is used in three different fundamental ways. One is to be a superpower to us, to be a co-pilot, like you might have heard of the term, where you can actually get better tools to help you become more creative or get some work done, whether that's coding or imagery or something like that. That's one way. The next way is to train us, to educate us. And the third way is to replace us. There's three different uses. And look at hallucinations. Hallucinations in a creative aspect is really great when you're doing visualizations. That's when I use it. I'm actually using AI, and I want it to hallucinate more to help me with the design of my remodel that I'm doing right now. But then when it hallucinates as a tool, let's say you're a doctor, that's a very, very bad use. When you're educating, you don't want hallucinations to happen. You absolutely don't. When you are replacing yourself or replacing someone, you don't want hallucinations happening. We're seeing that a lot with customer support lines. We're now seeing chatbots and agents being on customer support lines. You don't want that to happen. You don't want your brand, your company, or whatever to happen, to go poorly for that. So those are three examples to be a superpower for you, to train you or to replace you. And hallucinations are good in some respects and bad in other respects. And so I'm going to show you these 6 companies that have been around for a while now, and they all use AI, and they all use AI successfully. So the first one's Orianis Biosciences. Orianis, we use an AI-driven tool to help us do drug design. And we've been doing this 10 years. We have designed a cancer vaccine, multiple cancer vaccines. We are already through human trials, through some of them, phase 1, we're going to phase 2, and they are working. And AI has helped us to create these cancer vaccines. And you're going to hear much more about these things coming very, very soon, so, in the cancer realm and also in medical. Tons and tons of them. Again, hallucinations are bad. All right? Next, Plumeri. Plumeri, we've been hearing about nuclear-powered data centers, and we're going to use up all the environment all the environmental resources for AI. Well, Plumeri, what it is it's a digital sentry for your digital cameras. It watches like a security guard. It watches all your cameras, and it will tell you when something is going wrong. Except in that, it's a 20 megabyte model, not a 100 gigabyte model. It uses batteries. It uses solar power to do this AI work. We can do AI much more efficiently than what you're hearing about in the press today already, and it works better than actually things that work in the cloud. So that's another example of AI. Nabla. Nabla, over 400,000 physicians around the world today use it as a physician's assistant to summarize what they do. And when they're talking to a patient, it just takes voice recordings and it summarizes and it creates a plan. It cannot hallucinate. Right? Cannot hallucinate. And it doesn't. And that's why we have many, many doctors around the world. If you use ChatGPT to do your summarizations, 90% of the time, it's going to get it wrong. So you have to make sure you understand AI can be very effective, but it has to be well-trained on the things you want to use it for. Next one, Symbi. This is a replacement for a human. So the first 3, replacement. So the first one is a augment of a human, augmentation. The second one is a replacement. The next one is an augmentation of human. The fourth one is a replacement for a human. What does that do? It's a robot that does shelf scanning for inventory. And it literally can count to 97 to 98% accuracy all the things on a shelf, whether that's canned goods or whatever you have, retail fashion, that kind of stuff, does it to 97% accuracy. When a human does it, it's about 50 to 60% accurate. And humans hate doing that. So this is a perfect example of AI in service of humans to let humans do things that are much more valuable as opposed to tracking things. Smart text, another thing that replaces a human. And what that does is, when you create fabrics, 70% of the fabrics are good. So 30 to 40% of the fabrics that are knitted today are bad, because if you get one thread wrong and you get that roll of fabric is bad. So this watches every single thread that goes and how it's woven, and if it sees a defect, it stops right away. Today, before smart text, it would just run, and it would cause errors, and we would lose tons of environmental resources, and they would just burn those rolls of fabric with the defects in them. So that's another one. And the last one's Gray Parrot. Gray Parrot is using AI to sort, and another thing that it replaces human, sort recyclables from waste. So it literally watches these waste streams, looks for different types of plastics, metals, papers, and sorts these things using AI and vision at a rate that's 10 times faster than humans can do it. Another thing that humans don't want to do and we're not really good at. And it's helping us to preserve the environment. All of these things are running on low power processors. They're running on things that don't require nuclear power plants or anything. And they have been in service and are profitable right now and been working for 5 to 10 years. So there are lots of good uses of AI, and you can't have hallucinations. So hopefully you saw some of the interesting ones, and I gave you very, very practical ones that are already working. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I wanted to go maybe to kick this off on kind of the culture values part, because I think that was one thread that was picked up in a few of the things that you guys said. And I think humans are really good at understanding nuance and context and culture and tapping into storytelling. AI so far seems to homogenize that or flatten that and isn't necessarily great at context and nuance. How do we think that we can either work together, or how can we improve AI in understanding that and not just homogenizing everyone, not making hallucinations that are basically like misappropriating? Maybe Behnaz, we'll start with you, and then we'll see where we go from that.
Thank you, Skylar. It's a great question. I think maybe to answer that, I want to kind of reflect that this is also the limitations of us as cultural. The way that we look at each other in the society, we also classify each other, right? We say that you're a professor, you're a certain, we classify people in categories, and we identify certain categories for certain people. So the question of identification and classification in AI become hand in hand. In society, we talk about notion of identification. These systems, when they go to AI systems, then we have the question of classification. We have systems that they're very reductionist. They're just looking at gender classification or race classification or certain way that basically this system try to understand. They look at the data sets and then they reduce you to that sort of classified information. So the problem comes from us, and then it's somehow exacerbated in these AI systems. I don't think the answer is that these systems are bad in their own way, but it's kind of creating awareness that how can we bring the multiplicity of identification into these AI systems? Could we think about multimodal AI system which brings many aspects of human identity as a matrix that gives more nuance into the classification, which is less reductionist? I think that's potentially some way to go forward.
Or Paola, maybe in the example that you showed, like the hallucinations were based on individual stories. Like maybe that's one way, that it's like the input is directly the human story, and then the hallucination is like these synthetic memory.
And nobody's going to think that it's truth. People know that it's a very subjective interpretation. Maybe we're just hoping for too much or demanding too much. I mean, maybe we shouldn't be completely hands-off ever. And that's what we were discussing even before at breakfast. We had this great conversation. And we shouldn't let go of control, not because we're control freaks, but because it's a collaboration. It's not an abdication of responsibility. So many years ago, there was one of the salons that we did at MoMA was about artificial intelligence. I think it was 2018 or 2017. It was called Artificial Imperfection. And the whole salon was about the fact that you need to have humans in the loop, that we shouldn't expect perfection, and we should get as close as possible to perfection when we have a diagnostic model, of course. But we need to know that AI maybe will never be good at nuance when it comes to humans, and it's okay.
And Tony, can you talk about like the systems perspective?
Sure.
Loss of control, but maybe design through systems as a way to still have that collaboration?
Well, I think you should first know how these large language models are created. And what it is, it's reflecting, these models are just really glorified auto-completion mechanisms. And they're trained on the data sets of the world, okay? And it's just a reflection of us. So if all the media is about men, it's going to have more men than women, or it's all about, the US versus other societies. So it's trained on the data, and we're not doing a great job of picking and choosing the data and making sure that it is properly representing and taking minority topics and raising them up and promoting them. It's just literally reflecting what we have. So we have to think system-wide. We have to think about this holistically and go in, and we're already knowing about various projects where they're going in and capturing the cultures of various tribes in Africa and turning them into AI agents where they're going to get that data and bringing that into the mix So what we have to do, and this is what's wonderful, is we can now go and look at all these subcultures and all these different peoples around the world and go and learn from them and put that data into these models so they can see to be better represented. But at the same time, as the creators of these models, we have to go and be very clear on what we're picking and choosing. Today, if you look at what these companies are, they're only a band of 40 to 60 to 70 people, and they just scrape the internet and then put it out for us to and train it and then put it out. They don't have all these curation aspects. They don't have all of these things for the data sets. And these data sets only reflect what's happening on the web, not what we really want. And so we have to be much more directed in how we build these systems. And hopefully regulation is going to be a part of that as well.
Marcelo, to you, like, you know, just hearing what Tony's saying, like, I wonder, how do we think about like overestimating versus underestimating, and maybe in a physical context? Like, given that we're at Design Miami, there's so many things that are physical, yet most of what we see from AI is digital, and, you know, digital image, audio, video, etc. Like, how much do you think we're overestimating versus underestimating, or how far off are we in AI actually having influence in the physical world?
So I think that's perhaps like the biggest missing piece. It's like, how do we bring these models into the physical world? One of the things that I do quite often, I just go to any large language model and ask, you know, what's the weather like today? And every time I get a different thing, like, gives me a weather from a different city, it gives me the wrong weather, and I have a window right next to me, right? They just can't put their head out and look out the window. And it's a kind of a silly way to explain it, but I think that's really the fundamental problem. It's if you just think of them as data, where is that data situated? Where does it exist? What data is not included in the data set that would have potential impact into what those models are capable of doing and how they're connected? I think when we talk about, you know, especially when it comes to hallucination, you know, like, I think that if you have moments you can ground them into the world, and if you give models sensors, you give them actuators, you literally put them into the physical world, and I think a lot of those problems start getting resolved.
But how do you translate it to the physical world? Like, what are your top ways of translating that? I mean, you could go straight from like LLM to machine or something, but, you know, give us a couple other options of what you're thinking about how these things translate.
You mean in terms of actually putting? I mean, so one of the ways that I've been doing this is by literally putting them into objects. It's like connecting them like into the heart of how we make things. I tend to think of it in two ways. You can use them to design objects, you know, in terms of giving them form and shape and behavior, but also having them literally controlling the objects and the ways that you interact with them. And it's very, very interesting because the relationship that you develop with objects becomes very different. They're very, very intelligent. And I'm actually also very skeptical of thinking of these models in terms of intelligence in human terms. I think it's actually, we should not in any way anthropomorphize them. I think that they're not human. They're other kinds of intelligence. And I think if we treat them that way, I think we're in a much better place, because then we're not going to expect them to do what humans do. We're going to be looking for them to do other things. And I think they'll be safer that way as well. And I think that there's a lot of I get very concerned when we treat them as people. I think they're not people. And we've got to keep remembering that. And
that brings up the question of authorship. You know, traditionally design has had this legacy of the genius designer, you know, sitting there sketching, and in a way some of that is eroded. Often the cliche conversation becomes like AI is going to replace the designer and there's the loss of authorship, but I think it's a more nuanced relationship between the two. Behnaz, in your work, maybe talk about like where you see authorship and how you see that changing with new tools, maybe?
Yeah, I think these two questions back to back, it's very fascinating to think about the question of authorship, but also the role of designers in at least like creative process. I think what we are seeing in the last few years is astonishing. I mean, it was just a few years ago that the ChatGPT showed up, and we see Midjourney and a lot of generative AI tools, and all of a sudden design education in architecture schools and design schools have substantially changed. Like, we cannot dismiss that actually in education sector. But what is the role of designers? How are we grounding yourself in this continually changing landscape, which every day there is a new design tools popping in? And how do we catch up? I think this is our challenge really, to stay relevant in the field. I think to some extent it's back to Paola's point about question of control. I think we should have the radical acceptance that we are losing control and it's okay, and find a nice synergy between moments that we can co-create or co-create and collaborate with these systems and explore that possibilities further. So I think the role of designer really become this almost like a collaborator with these systems to really see how we can, to some extent, explore this possibility and use the affordances of these systems for designing novel ideas, novel forms, novel behaviors, novel intelligence that can be beyond sort of human intelligence, but somewhere between human, machine, nature, intelligence.
And
Can I jump in? No, I think that there's a really interesting question there too. Like, what kind of collaborators are these, right? Like, are they going to give us ideas? They're going to help us build things? And I think it's a very interesting question to ask as well. I was mentioning this earlier when we were talking. We do this with students. I tell students, use AI for every possible thing you can think of. Use it to write, use it to design, use it to have ideas, use it to talk to people, use it to answer to emails in the class. I don't really care what it is. But whatever you use it for, tell us how you did it so that we can all learn how this stuff works and we can share with each other. And I think in that way, hopefully we can build a new kind of design discipline where AI is at the center of it. And it's kind of a new form of collaborating in some ways.
Tony, can you talk about the documentary that we're talking about that you worked on? Because that, in recent memory, is one of the most powerful examples of this collaboration authorship. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Has anyone seen the documentary that just came out? Okay. Well, a few of us know then what it is. So the generative music pioneer Brian Eno has been putting together work ever since the late '60s, and he has always spurned having a documentary about him because 1 2-hour film can never capture everything about this artist. And so Gary Husfit was a director and a creator. Came to Brian with an idea, which is we're going to make a generative movie about your life. In other words, every time you watch the movie, it will be a different version of movie. Because there are 7,000 and growing hours of footage from his life and the things he's done, that literally what happens is taking all of that footage, creating sub-segments of that footage, and laying out a timeline, and an AI editor and director, every time you want to see it, creates in this timeline, pulls from those 6,000 to 7,000 hours, and finds segments and puts together the movie. And it does it in a very coherent way. But then when you watch it the next time, it changes, and usually about 60 to 70% of the movie is different every time you watch it. And so think of this as, I want to go see it. Like, you say, I went to go see Avatar. I want to go see it. Well, I don't want to go with you again because I've already seen it. I want to go see Eno multiple times with my friends and take them because I'm going to see a different movie every time about an artist I really love. And so this is an incredible form of humans, and there's a lot of humans involved creating this, along with an AI director where we give up control to allow for this new experience that the world's never had. And when you talk to the editors and the people involved, they were really wrestling with this control aspect of like, we're going to give up the creative control and what's going to be shown to the audience. It's our names on it. But it really works. Hopefully you enjoyed it as well. But I think it really works. And it's a perfect example of humans and AI working together for a whole new experience. And I hope you can get a chance to see it. It's just called the Eno documentary. You can only see it in person in a theater. There's no Netflix, there's no streaming, because it's different every time you watch it.
And Paola, how do you think about the authorship and curation in that sense? Like, does it change the way you curate or who you curate, or like how are you thinking about this in the design curation space?
Not really, and that's what's happened throughout my career, and that's what I think has enabled me to deal with technology as it came. So ultimately, I try to be a hunter-gatherer for my audience. I just come back with the warm, bleeding kind of like prey, and I just like put it down in front of my audience. But seriously, I try to have a very strong spine and to think, okay, you are Gary Hustwit, right? You're the director and you want to make a movie that is generative and like, so that's your goal. Your tools are the AI, Brian, etc. How do you achieve it? Is the result elegant? Is it adding something to the world? So I do that with any kind of material or technology. So adding video games or the emojis to the collection is no different than adding a wooden chair, handmade. So it doesn't change the way I consider objects. It changes maybe the range of the research, but luckily I've always been curious and omnivorous, so that works well. So because of my training that was really quite broad because of Italy and Milan, I think it's always the same kind of curation with very different sets of materials.
Do you think, maybe this is a hallucination, but do you think, if you're evaluating the results of design, whether that's human design, nature designing something, AI designing, you're evaluating that to understand whether or not it should be in MoMA or shown or whatever. Could the very definition of what good design be change? You know what I mean? Like, could it change our understanding of what we think is good design?
The whole good design thing is something that I don't touch with a stick, because it's almost like a colonial idea of like, it's very, very biased, gendered, timed. So it goes against this idea of fragmentation of needs. So if I ever use the term good design, it has the small g and the small d, but it's so much wider right now, because good design, I always say, does it add, that's the litmus test, does it add something meaningful to the world, which means it does not waste resources. But when I say something meaningful, it doesn't have to be always goody two shoes. Like, I think that the Tamagotchi, which is the most useless thing ever invented, added something super meaningful to the world, because it was the first experience of anguish and responsibility for children. I mean, it's just so it's not all goody, but that's the litmus test. And I say it for all of you. When you see something, does it add something to the world? And it could be just delight, right? Or puzzlement, but that's really the test.
And that resonates from an education standpoint. Like, I think many of us say literally the same thing to our students. Like, what does this bring to the world? And, is this making positive change in some way? Or, what is the value of it? Maybe Behnaz and Marcelo, how do you think this changes design education? Is our traditional model of design education still valuable? Is it obsolete? How do we adjust? Given that we're biased and we're from MIT and MAD is really focused on the future of design, how should we rethink education in light of design and AI?
Well, I think definitely something that we cannot dismiss. I mean, it's here with us, and it's responsibility of us in a way to educate the new generation to be able to think through these technologies, to address them in a critical way. I think the way that we can also use these technologies to, going back to the question of good design, and if there is such a small good design, a small d, a small g, if there is such a thing, I think one thing that these systems allow us is actually to tap into more complex information faster. I mean, these systems are able to compute so much information, from efficiency to more social, cultural, environmental issues that we are not capable of with our biological brain. So at least I think in education sector, we can teach our next generation of designers to think more holistically about the landscape that this cultural and technological landscape can work together to hopefully lead us to a more peaceful future. I think that's my hope.
Marcelo, what do you think about design education?
So I think, first of all, I think we need to stop thinking in terms of educators, versus the educated. I think that this is a collective enterprise. We do it all together. I've had students literally ask me, like, now that we have AI, why do we need you? And I asked them back, I was like, why do you think you need me? Tell me if I'm being valuable. And but I also ask for feedback. You know, am I, you know, this is useful to you? Are you learning something? But for example, I've had really incredible experiences with AI in teaching where, you know, a student asks a question, I'm not super sure how to answer it. I ask the AI with the student right next to me. I look at the answer. I ask them, do you understand it? They're like, no. I was like, okay, let me explain this to you. And they now understand it. And then they use what the AI says in their work. So I think that it's really just kind of changing the model of how we think of education. You know, I think that to me is incredibly exciting. But I think it requires breaking down this sort of very traditional roles of who teaches, who learns. I think we all learn together. There's all different kinds of ways and sort of epistemological methods for going about this stuff. And I think we need to explore.
And one of the, I think, most surprising yet rewarding aspects of teaching at MIT that I've found is just the brilliance of especially the undergrads. You know, they are way smarter than me in every possible way you can imagine. So then you sit there and you're like, I'm the educator? Like, I don't know anything compared to what you guys know. And in a way that I think prepares us for this continual battle of like any new technology, whether it's AI or software or hardware or whatever, that you're like trying to keep up with and and in a way I think that's where collaboration comes from, and that's where we can harness surprise. Like, how do yes, we could be surprised by the hallucinations from a design standpoint on AI, but we can also be surprised by the intelligence of our students and by the weird hallucinations they have, or be surprised by the natural, you know, like, in a way, like if you harness surprise, it doesn't matter who's the educator or the educated, you know, like everyone's contributing to surprise. So maybe let's riff on that for a second, like in the hallucination and surprise territory. Like, Tony, maybe for you, are there aspects that still surprise you? Like, you're so in this world and you've been in this longer than many of us, you know, like, are you still surprised or not?
Oh, absolutely. I'm surprised because some of this stuff actually works. You're like, oh my God, that works. If you know how these systems are created, they're really dumb. And you're like, oh my God, that came out of that. And that's why people are like, oh, they start to give them, anthropomorphize them and say, oh, that's like, they're like humans, and they're definitely not. There's some amazing things that come out of them that you get really surprised at. But there's a lot of stuff that come out of them that you get really surprised in a negative way. And so people have been talking a lot about artificial general intelligence. You're hearing about it all the time. And we're nowhere near close. It's just all marketing, and people are saying our AGI. We're going to get there in 2 years. It's not. We're not even close. But, so don't believe all the hype. That said, and people have been worried that AGIs are going to take over the world. That's not what I'm worried about. What surprises me, and in a way it does and in a way it doesn't, is that I'm worried about these systems where people think they are smart, they think they are useful in all contexts, that they believe them all the time. And that's what I'm surprised about. So I'm not worried about artificial general intelligence taking over and taking all our jobs. I'm worried about artificial general intelligence, the way we're doing it today and the LLMs we have, making our environments weird. Because people won't know what the truth is, because they, you know, our kids, if they don't know that these things don't really always give you good answers, they're going to start to believe them, and they're not going to know what the truth is. And we're having a hard enough time knowing what the truth is now with our media and everything else going on in social media. So if kids are trained and even in an educational setting, and they're using these things and they're not productized right, and they don't have the right guardrails, and they're not trained right, like I was showing you, you know, hallucinations are really bad when it comes to education and the next generation, and we can have a very, very different place in the societies, the way we think about everything, if these things take over the way they are. And that's what's most surprising to me, is how much people are already turning things over to them. There I go. So to it.
Yeah. Let me have one final question that we all try to answer, and then we'll do some Q&A. Can each of you tell me, like, what do you think is the next frontier in design, whether that's AI related or not, and where you're seeing that emerge? Like, what are you excited about around the corner that we should keep an eye on? Maybe Paola, you start?
Oh yeah, I was smiling because I see design becoming more and more dissolving into the ground, dissolving into culture, dissolving into people. So I love how Synthetic Dreams or the Pollinator Project are less about the formal or formalized ego, the designer. You were saying before that we used to think of the designer as the solitary genius. That was the architect or the artist. Luckily, designers have always loved melting with, you know, the environment. And I see it happening more and more. So these designers that take their pleasure and take their soothing ego boosts from really embedding themselves in communities and enabling communities. I'm thinking before we were talking about corn, there's Fernando Lapos, who's this Mexican designer that was trained in the UK and that now went back to his village near Puebla to help the community reinsert the original corn that's now completely been supplanted by U.S. industrial corn, by creating also a new industry that uses the shells of the corn to make marquetry materials. So I'm thinking designers that work in this kind of systemic way, and that's where I see the future more and more.
Behnaz?
I mean, this is such a wonderful question. I see, I mean, especially being here in the Design Miami, I feel like there is so much beautiful design that you all see. A lot of them, they're using some cutting edge digital fabrication, some cutting edge craft, which is incredible to see. I think besides the beautiful, shiny, sexy forms, I really hope that the future of design lies some critical thinking where design and new technology also used to address some important issues of our times, because now we can, because this is the time that we actually have the potential to use and harness some of this technology to address larger issues that matters, either social, cultural, political, or environmental issues of our time. So I really hope that that's the future of our design, and we hopefully see that more and more in Design Miami too.
Marcelo?
Like perhaps in a very boring and technical way, let's start there. I'm very excited about large language models becoming very, very small. You can put them everywhere. I think that's going to change our relationship to the physical world in really dramatic ways that I can't even begin to describe. I think it's going to be really interesting, really exciting.
So small language models.
Tiny language models, very little ones. But I think the other part is, I think it's the design of intelligence itself. You know, it's like I think that we've designed plenty of chairs. Like, what does it look like to design thinking? And I think that there's an entirely new space for designers to operate in that I think is really, really interesting. So that this is not just a world that's going to be created by, you know, machine learning, data scientists, engineers, but by designers, by people that are creative, that care about empathy, that listen to users and people. And I think that to me is really exciting.
Tony?
I fully agree, and I'm everything the panelists have said. I fully agree with, and I like the fact that all of these very technical jobs and these technical disciplines, now you can roll up and use a lot of AI to do those things, but you can really work at the system level, working out the cultural things you want to address in agriculture, at a certain place. Like, it's amazing what you can do, and you don't need these very, very large teams like they used to do to be able to do this. You can be empowered with a small set of people doing design at the highest quality and taking into account all of the various disciplines as well as details when it comes to targeting a certain type of person or customer or whatever it is you're trying to do. And you can bring all those factors on the table at once. Usually when you're a small design team, you can't take all of those things into account because you only have so much money and time. Now with these types of agents that you can work with, you're going to be able to really supercharge really high quality people, small teams, to do outscale work, you know, multiply people by 10x or 100x. And I'm so jazzed about that, to see what happens.
What do you think?
Oh, what do I think? Paola hit on this a little bit, that to me it's not just about AI, like the artificial intelligence, but it's all forms of intelligence. Like, you know, computing is the recent one that we're excited about, but all of us are made out of materials. And all of us also have intelligence, and that means that there's many other forms of intelligence that are not just synthetic, and that are not just human, but many things in the natural world. But also you can imagine not just biology in the natural world, but geology, and weather and like all these other things outside of our own planet. So I'm interested in the other forms of intelligence that aren't just computing and how they all sort of create this systems level collaboration. But why don't we turn to the audience? I think we can do 1 or 2 questions. Anyone have? Yeah.
I have a question about your use.
No, wait. We have a mic.
Yeah.
Via Dustin organized this whole thing.
I'm interested in the way that the term intelligence is being used, because I'm still curious about that. If we think this is just actually massive parallel pattern matching, right? 'Cause it's dumb, but it's fast. And then how much more of this is really about providing perspective. So using these models as scouts to help us, to give us that broader context and broader perspective. How do you think about that?
Who wants to take it? Yeah, Tony's.
Let me be clear. These are just prediction machines. They take in all the data and they do probabilistic weighting to, if I've seen this word, well, symbol, first, and then it most likely this is the next symbol, and the next symbol, and it literally is just a prediction machine. There is no intelligence. Now you're starting to hear about there's reasoning coming. It's not really reasoning. It's just retrying over and over different models to get a better fit on what they think is the right outcome. All right, there is not intelligence in these models. And so when people are saying we're going to get to artificial general intelligence, AGI, that's not it. It's a different definition of what intelligence is from a machine intelligence perspective. But we shouldn't even call it intelligence. It really isn't that. But you have to understand the math and all these other things. We're going to get much better models that hallucinate yet less, but we don't have any concepts for real reasoning or intelligence in these models today.
Can I? So Marvin Minsky, who was one of the founders of AI, or sort of helped start the field, he used to describe intelligence as a bit of a suitcase word, where you can put any other thing that you want into it. Creativity, reasoning, etc. I tend to think of intelligence as, if it looks intelligent to me, it's good enough. So it's a little bit of the sort of art, is in the eye of the beholder. So I think intelligence is perhaps in the mind of the beholder in some ways.
Question over here.
Yeah, maybe I could take on Tony. I don't buy this approach towards intelligence. I subscribe to Blaise Aguriakos' approach to it, who argues we're already at the beginning of artificial general intelligence. And he views intelligence, it's not a question of differentiating. A bird can fly and a plane can fly. Both can fly. We have forms of intelligence out there. There are different forms of intelligence, but they are still intelligent. And the point he makes, as soon as the Wright brothers have got a plane to fly, that's the beginning of artificial general intelligence. And I think our real problem is not anthropomorphizing things, but taking an anthropocentric viewpoint and judging AI from our perspective. Now, let's just take ChatGPT. It knows 10,000 times more than anyone here, and it does this performance in 3 seconds. If we were ChatGPT looking at us, wouldn't that ChatGPT, if it could think, of course, wouldn't it think that we were incredibly slow and incredibly dumb? I think we needed to change our perspective.
Yes, I would fully agree with you if we didn't have the hallucination problems, if we didn't have all the other problems where we know it's not working. Okay, I believe in artificial and specific intelligence. When you train it on the right data sets, when you train it on the right things, you can get it to do amazing things. We don't ask a plane to a bird and then a plane to then also go and plant your garden. A plane does what a plane does because it's very productized, it's very well understood, it's very right. We're asking what we do with artificial intelligence, the way we're using it now, is we are hiring a know-it-all. Who here worked with a know-it-all? What do? They always have an answer, and even if it's wrong, they state it as it's a fact. So when artificial specific intelligence, when it's trained properly in a given context, I fully believe it's a different type of intelligence, but it's incredible. But when it's trained on everything and it's not productized and you don't know exactly what it is, you're talking to a know-it-all and it will always give you an answer. It doesn't say, I don't know that. So I believe that we have to get really much more specific in terms of our definitions and how we build these systems and understand. So I'm all for, I want a LinkedIn for artificial agents, artificial intelligence agents. I want a LinkedIn where I have a dossier of what it's been trained on, how it scores, how it works, and where it's worked, and where it has had failures. I want to be able to hire those and fire them at will, and I want to have that regulated so I can see what those artificial intelligence agents do and won't do. That is what we need. We are not there yet, and ChatGPT and all those are just know-it-alls. The most successful uses of them are not so specific, but specific enough. Like finance and legal and doctors, if they're trained right, we can trust them and they can work incredibly well with us and make us raise up a level, right? Just like when you look at AlphaGo for Go or chess, these things where they're very specific functions, they are incredible. But it's when we're trusting these know-it-alls and teaching us the wrong things, that's where the problem is.
Yay.
All right?
Yeah. Any final questions?
Love
I
it.
think we
Thanks
have
for that.
time for one more.
Battle.
Yeah, right here. Mike's coming.
Hi, thank you guys for sharing all of your insight. So I'm an architectural designer based in New York, and as someone who's recently entered the industry as a designer, AI can sometimes feel very overwhelming or very fast-paced. And I guess from your point of view, like, what advice would you offer on how to like take that overwhelming feeling and use it to our ability to grow and not feel like it's moving faster than we are?
Who wants to go? Behnaz?
Yeah, sure. Well, I often answer this question from my own sort of anxiety perspective as well, so I can relate to that. I mean, we are in this era that everything moves so fast, and every day there is invention of new tools, and you have to constantly learn something. At the same time, I think the best way to move forward is really let your curiosity to take you. So depending on where your curiosity would take you, you let that to sort of direct you, and you don't need to learn every tool out there, but based on what you need to do or what the concept or the projects that you're working on, you start to acquire the tool that you need to do. Having said that, it's always good to keep an eye out there to see also what is, I mean, there is a dance between what is out there and what triggers curiosity in you and allow you to move forward. So in a way, it's you have to kind of dance with all these forces.
All right,
Can I jump in there quick? Ground yourself in design and what you know, because that knowledge is very precious, and I think that knowledge will help you navigate that world and work with those AIs. Actually, my friend Nick was sitting right there, very good graphic designer, and very good at using AI actually. So when I try to do something I don't know how to do, I ask him, and he knows just the right way to prompt a model to get the results that you want, because he has the right language and the right way of talking to them. So I think that don't worry about the AI. This stuff is going to move crazy fast. It's overwhelming, but it's going to settle down at times, and things are going to stabilize in some products, like Tony's saying. But the knowledge of design that you have, I think, is very precious, and that's your sort of kind of starting point to use those models.
And we have an exception for the question rule, but Glenn, your last voice.
Hey everyone, so I'm Glenn Adamson. I'm the curatorial director here at Design Miami, and first of all, I wanted to thank the panel for an amazing conversation. I also just thought it might be appropriate to find out what ChatGPT has to say on this topic. So I asked how will artificial intelligence change the field of design, and it gave me a really, really great answer, which actually touched on a lot of the things you guys have been talking about. In great detail, accuracy, who knows. And I just thought I'd read the last paragraph. Overall, AI's role in design is not to replace human creativity, but to augment it, allowing designers to work more efficiently, produce more personalized experiences, and enhancing user experience. However, it will also require a thoughtful integration with human creativity, ethics, and intuition to achieve the best outcomes. Not bad, right?
Very diplomatic.
Exactly.
I think a human wrote that.
So maybe we give ChatGPT
Slightly
the last
vanilla,
word,
but
as often. So anyway, just really wanted to thank from the bottom of our hearts here at Design Miami, thank this amazing panel for their fantastic contribution.
Thank you,
so
Glenn.
much.
Thank you so much.
Justin and Skylar.